joy. I want that joy. Hey, I want that joy. I want that joy every day.
So there is a few important things I want to get out of you today. Also for the audience who are watching here in the United States and in Middle East and around the world, because the show would be aired in Africa as well. In American books, curriculum in the American books, when you educate kids here, first thing they grow up black, they were enslaved in the United States, and I think that have psychological effect on the kids. If I grow up and it shows that I was slave, how could I be grow up in society to be successful? How can I grow up? And it's the back of my mind, always I was enslaved. I came as a slave. I hear in TV I was a slave. Everything that slave, slave, slave. And which is not true, because black people, they were not slave in Africa. They were king, they were queen, they were imperial, they were successful. So I think I want to talk to people working with you and in the Congress that we need to have certain amendments, certain new law to change in the school books that the black history did not start with being slave.
If you are born on American soil, you are an American. Your roots might be in another country. And so, my question to her, how do you explain a Tiger Woods? Why can't we call ourselves African Americans, Chinese Americans, Japanese Americans, and so on and so forth? And that is what you will find on the census form. Remember, we take it every 10 years, so we will take the census in 2020 again. And you will find those on the census form. And everybody, I don't care what country, what nation they're in, they have the greatest respect for the United States of America.
Very important and special for me, since I'm African American, and I'm proud to be African American.
Is where I said I love you. You were kind of shy. Seemed like you were in the chrome
Pleasure. I was so inspired by being a young woman myself that hearing her stories, becoming the first African American woman in the California State Senate.
When I was voted into the California State Senate from the school board, when I got there, they said, "We don't want you here." And I would respond by saying, when he ran for this seat and I ran, I simply got more votes than he did. And he owns 7 businesses in South Bay. And I came out with the most number of votes. And then I would do a pause and I would say, can any of you vouch with getting over 80% of the vote? And then they left me alone. I was the only second person in the California State Senate at that time to have an earned PhD. Paul Carpenter he was the first to have an earned PhD. I was the second. So I let them know who I was, you see. And that's what I think Barack Hussein Obama was all about. You believe in yourself. And Barack Hussein Obama was the chair of the Harvard Law Review. He also studied out here at Occidental College. And then he is a constitutional attorney. He's a constitutional scholar.
So my next question, what's President Obama's biggest achievement?
Well, it's the AARC. This is, originally, when it was passed, it was access to affordable health care. Now it's Obamacare, or affordable health care. He implemented it. And you see 20 million people are on it. You cannot remove that program overnight. it will take years. People will die if they don't get affordable health care. And so your nation is only as strong as your people are. So that's one of his greatest achievements. He saved the automobile industry. And he took federal funds and put them in place so they could continue to build automobiles. And I'm just hearing that China is going to be buying our Cadillacs, you know. So that's one of his achievements. He also, the environmental laws he put in place. Also, he had relationships with Iran and Iraq. And these are his finest achievements. It looks like under this new administration, we are retrogressing, being pushed back rather than progressing. And we need to be a world leader. We need to honor NAFTA, National Atlantic Treaty Organization. We need them as our ally.
Next question, we talked about the biggest achievement for President Obama, and you mentioned Obamacare. So what's his biggest failure while he was in the White House?
I didn't recognize any failures. Where I think there was lacking is that his meeting with other governments and all was not followed through into this new administration. And so there is nothing that you can say negative about his 2 terms in office.
My next question, what do you think about his foreign policy? Everybody say he has a big failure in his foreign policy. What do you think about
Well, that's what I was saying. The foreign policy that he developed with Iran and Iraq wasn't followed through on. And you see, with this new administration, unless they followed through and respected his meetings with them, that can be looked at as a failure of this new administration. But I think he probably should have emphasized it more with the new administration.
Next question, we talked about the biggest achievement for President Obama, and you mentioned Obamacare. So what's his biggest failure while he was in the White House?
I didn't recognize any failures. Where I think there was lacking is that his meeting with other governments and all was not followed through into this new administration. And so there is nothing that you can say negative about his 2 terms in office.
My next question, what do you think about his foreign policy? Everybody say he has a big failure in his foreign policy. What do you think about
Well, that's what I was saying. The foreign policy that he developed with Iran and Iraq wasn't followed through on. And you see, with this new administration, unless they followed through and respected his meetings with them, that can be looked at as a failure of this new administration. But I think he probably should have emphasized it more with the new administration.
President Obama? Given $150 billion to Iran, which is not our alliance, and also they sponsor terrorists, they sponsor Hamas, they sponsor Hezbollah, they sponsor the Muslim Brotherhood, the extremist group, don't you think, and they are against our alliance with Saudi Arabia, our good friend and alliance with the United States, and he given $150 billion to Iran to sponsor all this activity in Middle East. Don't you think this is a big failure for Obama administration?
He did not give it to them to sponsor all of that.
Correct.
He gave it, and it started under Bush, and it was Iraq. And he made them sovereign. We gave a resolution allowing President Bush to use whatever tools he had in his tool case, or whatever he thought was right. And so Iraq was the big issue at the time. It was Iran that President Barack Hussein Obama met with and agreed that they needed to be given certain donations from this country to help them rise up. Now, there were radicals that formed, ISIS and all these other groups.
So be precise.
And so he did not give that money
So yes
to
or no,
them.
given 150 billion, it's a good decision or bad decision?
I think it was a good decision if it were used the right way.
But it was not, they're not using the right way. They fight in Saudi Arabia, our biggest alliance.
My answer to your question, it was a good decision. Now, on the other side, the responsibility was for them as a sovereign nation to use it responsibly.
The second question, Obama administration supported the extremist group, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, to take power in Egypt in 2012. And President Morsi became the president. And President Obama made a deal with the Brotherhood and gave them $8 billion in order to give 40% from Sinai Peninsula to Hamas and become a training camp to a new Al-Qaeda in Egypt. And when the Egyptian people, 40 million people, stood in the street in June 30, 2013, and overthrew President Morsi, and he got arrested by the military, Obama administration and Hillary, they call it a coup, which is it was a revolution. And as far as you remember, me and you, we said the next day here to explain to write a testimonial, because you were going to go to the Black Caucus at the time, and you want to give to President Obama that it was a revolution but by the young Egyptian people, and it was not a coup. Don't you think that was a big mistake from President Obama administration and Hillary Clinton to support the Brotherhood, the extremist group, against the will of the 40 or the 90 million of the Egyptian people?
I don't know if their intent, both the president and Hillary, was to support a coup. I don't think so. The responsibility is on both sides. We got Osama bin Laden. We did that. That's one of his achievements. And what happens with our monies that we give, we're always giving monies to other foreign nations. And the responsibility has to be on both sides to see that the monies that we give from the United States of America is used responsibly. And what happens is that the radicals take over. And that money gets out of hand. So I could say that he probably could have done more to follow up on how those dollars would be used responsibly by American values.
Hi, this is Sean Delon with the Sean Delon Show, and I have my co-host Jordan Bird with the Sean Delon Show, and Diane Watson, former Congresswoman.
Hi there, I'm Jordan Bird here with Sean Delon, our host, and we're interviewing our Honorable Diane Watson.
A few more important question. How, Diane, if young African American kids now, women or boys, and in general, others beside African American, watching Diane now, how can those kids in the hood by South Central LA or Watts or Compton, how can to be inspired by Diane, to be like Diane Watson, and stay away from violence, drugs, gangs member, how can that African American kids in the street to be like Diane? How they can be inspired by Diane?
Okay,
What do you tell them?
it all starts in the home.
At home.
It all starts at home. And what they see their parents do in too many of our homes are without fathers.
I want that joy, hey, I want that joy, I want that joy, yeah. Let's turn it up like I was in a video on BET. You can't erase your past away, but you can take.
Also for the audience who are watching here in the United States and in Middle East and around the world, because the show will be aired in Africa as well. I want to know about your father. Earlier you mentioned that your father was in the law enforcement.
officer.
And so many people don't know that. So what, your father, tell me very short about your father.
Yeah,
please.
my father was born in Kansas City, Kansas, and he came here to Los Angeles, and he happened to meet this young woman who was 22 years old,
Mhm.
and my father was, he wore a gray felt hat, a three-piece gray suit, and gray shoes. And my mother, I have pictures of my mother putting her leg up like this, leaning against my father. Anyway, he was the first officer at Newton Street on Central Avenue. And when they got ready to build University Station across from USC, he was chosen to go there. And of course everyone there was white. And they were driving down Cimarron, and they saw a for rent sign at 3717 Cimarron, and he sent his partner in, and that's how we broke the block. And across the street was a vacant lot. And about 2 years later, after we moved there, some people came over and looked at the saw. You used to play in that lot. And they built a street through there, and they built a home for someone by the name of Rochester, who was a famous black actor, radio. And so anyway, my dad never shot his gun until one day on the corner of Jefferson and Arlington, and I was just up there today. There were three guys standing openly smoking marijuana. So of course, at that time, you could not smoke marijuana out on the streets. You can now, because of some current legislation, do it at home. But anyway, they threw their cigarettes away and they started to run. And he said, stop, and he had his gun up like this. Stop, stop. And on the third time, and they were taught at that time, you shoot to kill. You don't shoot to maim, you shoot to kill. And he shot the guy and he fell dead on his godmother's lawn on 2nd Avenue and so on. And she called him to the house and she said, Bill, my father, was just behind someone who he had to shoot and he fell dead. After that, he no longer wanted to be actively on the force.
I have a few more important questions. How, Diane, if young African American kids now, women or boys, and in general others besides African American, watching Diane now, how can those kids in the hood by South Central LA or Watts or Compton, how can to be inspired by Diane, to be like Diane Watson, and stay away from violence, drugs, gangs member, how can that African American kids in the street to be like that? How they can be inspired by that?
Okay,
What do you tell them?
it all starts in the home.
At home.
It all starts at home. And what they see their parents doing, too many of our homes are without fathers. And too many of our young people get pregnant, the girls get pregnant early, and they don't even know who the father was. So it starts in the home, and you have to model the behavior for your children that will lead them in a more positive. That's when I said helicopter into the home, into the neighborhood, into the community.
So the kids are
And
victim of the
They
parents
can be.
not being responsible and society.
When a child is born, who's the first person that the child sees? Is the mother. And if the mother's Japanese, she's going to speak to that baby in Japanese. If the mother is Mexican,
Correct.
if the mother is, speaks English, that's the language. So children learn from their parent, or parents, the home environment. Then you go next door to your neighborhood and you try to see that your neighborhood shares the same values that you do.
Correct.
And you see, if you want to get into leadership, then you have to lead people.
So you,
And where do you learn?
so first,
and so-
I apologize to interrupt you. So you want to say mother and the father are the source and the foundation to create a peaceful, productive society.
The
So,
mother
the mother.
is the most important person.
And this is where
The
we're going to go
child's
from
life.
here.
When your eyes open, who do you see?
The mother. So what do you tell women in general in our society today? How women they present themselves? And we're going to go to the other topic, woman rights. And in the old days, women, they were seeking woman rights
Well-
until they got the rights. But how women abuse the power of the right now, and they're not really productive in society. As you said, the problem comes with the mother at home. So our society is very defective, a lot of criminal, drugs abuse in our society. So that means it comes from the mother. She's responsible
Well,
about what's going on in our society.
the mother plays a major role. It's wonderful when you have to balance with the father, who really cares. But you learn your behavior in the place where you're born, all right? And you learn what people in that place value, you see? So you want to have all the other things that you're talking about come about later on. The first person you learn from and you're fed from
Is the mother.
Okay.
So our society have a problem now, that the future mother for the next generation, they're not capable and reliable and qualified to lead the next generation. So we're having a major issues, and nobody
wouldn't
discussed that.
I wouldn't say that they're not qualified. It depends on the home, it depends on your values, your beliefs, what's happening in your community where you grew up.
But our society have a problem now.
And yeah, we have problems.
And as you said before, it's the mother. So that means
Yeah,
we're having
yeah.
problem in
Yeah.
our society that the future mothers of the next generation having problems.
You
to
can't
help
say
to-
that about all mothers.
Correct.
But in certain situations, you know.
It's a big percentage.
And a lot of it has to do with the class system that we have in a democratic society. And the underclasses, you know, where do they live? What are the opportunities? What will the mother do with the child? Have that child and put it on the doorstep for someone else to take care. So it all begins in the home, where you,
Right.
whatever your home is. And we have too many of our fathers that don't bear the responsibility of being there to raise their own children.
Right.
And that happened because we, people who look like me, were brought off the continent of Africa. They would take the husband and separate the husband from the wife and take the children and sell them to other slave owners. That is the history of the United States of America. And let me go, I've studied anthropology. All human beings on this globe came off of the massive land called Africa. And where are you from?
I grew up in Alexandria, Egypt.
Okay.
So I'm,
And Egypt is located where?
it's in North Africa.
Okay. So you're from the continent
So
of
basically,
Africa.
I'm African American.
You are.
I'm African American.
And that came about because in 1980, I was in the Senate, and I was getting ready to make out my census form. And at that time, they had Anguloid, Mongoloid, and Negroid. And I'm looking at that and I'm saying, how do you explain the Tiger Woods? So I was chairing the Black Caucus up in Sacramento.
Correct.
And I was the only African-American female on the Senate side. I never was on the Assembly side. I was always on the Senate side. And so I called Washington, D.C. and asked for the director of the census. And I said, can you come out? I'm chairing the Black Caucus. I'd like you to come out and explain something. So she did. And I said, you know, if I am Chinese, where are my roots? China. If I'm Japanese, where are my roots from? Japan. If you're Mexican, where are they from? Mexico. I said, then explain to me at Tiger Woods. Now, those of us born here, regardless of where our parents were born, if you're born here, you are an American. So, why don't we identify?
Walked into the front door. Friends said that they saw you. Months and days go by. Walked into the front door. Friends said that they saw you. Months and days go by. You played a perfect guy.
Entertainment every
Turning it up like I was in a video on BT. You can't erase your past away, but you can take control. Rise above the rest and say, I want that joy. I want that joy. Hey, this giver was turning it up like I was in a video on BT. You can't erase your past away, but you can take control. Rise above the rest and say.
Her for her great hospitality at her house today. We all had a great time today, so thank you.
Yes, it was such a pleasure. I was so inspired by being a young woman myself that hearing her stories becoming the first African American woman in the California State Senate. Such an inspiration. Thank you. And thank you for coming to the Sean Delon Show.
This giver was turning it up like I was in a video on BT.